City's minister speaking a little bit earlier. But let's get reaction now with the senior fellow at the Social Market Foundation, Shreya Nanda, and their head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, Elliot, Keck. Shreya, what did you make of what the City minister had to say? He's pretty adamant that the Labour Party will have to raise taxes in order to come up with its funding.
Well, I think that's the bigger question behind this whole debate about the dossier is, I think there's quite a lot of agreement that we're going to need to tackle the shortfall in public spending across our public services. And Labour have said they want to go in the direction of investment, and they've said that's going to be fully costed, how that's going to be funded, and potentially from borrowing and some from taxes. And the Conservatives have said they want to go down the path of tax cuts. And I think investment is a better way to deal with the situation we find ourselves in than going down the path of tax cuts. So I'm not really sure what the Conservatives' plan is there.
I do get the sense that both parties here are seemingly suggesting that they'll get more money from limited taxation than they actually will. Is your assessment that both of these parties potentially will actually be raising more tax than they're saying?
Well, I think we have to wait till the manifestos come out, but I think, if one party is promising to go down the path of investment and the other is to go down the path of tax cuts, then it's not clear that the Conservatives are going to be in the same boat of having to come up with taxes to fund investment if they're not making the case for that investment in the first place, but then they're not answering the question of how they're going to deal with the crisis in public spending that's going to follow that.
Elliot, Keck, Taxpayers Alliance, this is an interesting point for the Conservatives to be making, because after all, for the last 2.5 years, we've seen tax rise after tax rise from this government.
Yeah, and listen, the irony is that all the Labour Party has to do to increase taxes is to stick with existing fiscal plans that the Conservatives have already laid out. Under existing fiscal plans that the Conservative government have brought in, the OBR projects that the tax burden is going to go up to an 80-year high by the end of the decade, another percentage point on GDP. So the great irony is that the reason why Labour are going to have these additional resources, this additional revenue to spend on their priorities is precisely because of Conservative tax plans, which, obviously we oppose.
It's interesting, though, we've talked a lot about this triple lock plus idea, the idea that thresholds will be raised for those in retirement under the Conservatives. That's created clear blue water between the two parties.
Yeah, it has, in clear blue water that I'd argue is probably inappropriately created. I think we need to prioritise people who are in work, people who are actually generating economic growth. If you look at, let's say, the 40p tax threshold, it's barely budged since the Conservatives came to power. I think when the Conservatives came to power, it was at about £42,000. It's now at £50,000. Once you take into account an inflation, you are dragging in a significant number of relatively ordinary working people.
Well, the Labour Party has come out swinging today, claiming that the Prime Minister was directly lying about this over £2,000 per household figure. Let's listen to what the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, had to say today.
Well, the letter from the Permanent Secretary of the Treasury confirms what Labour had said last night. The Prime Minister lied in the debate last night. Labour has no plans to increase taxes on working people. In fact, I have ruled out increases in income tax, national insurance and VAT for the duration of the next Parliament.
Shreya, do you think that it's credible to say that there won't be any new taxes on working people when the Labour Party is committed to these frozen tax thresholds that do drag working people, into higher tax than they would otherwise be paying?
I think Labour have said what they've ruled out, and that's increases in VAT, income tax and national insurance.
Not against inflation, though.
Yeah, which is obviously different from saying they're not going to freeze the thresholds. And I think, again, we have to wait and see what's going to be in the manifesto. But I think we've seen Labour change their policies in the past in response to changing fiscal circumstances, so it's possible that we could see that again. And
Elliot, do you think that this entire conversation is pretty moot? Because neither of these parties have released their manifestos. Are we just talking complete nonsense?
Well, I think, listen, the hugely frustrating thing is that while it's positive that Rachel Reeves is ruling out increasing the 3 largest taxes imposed on working people and British people more generally, no party is really talking about serious, sustainable tax cuts. And with the tax burden heading to, as I said, an 80-year record high, the highest level that it will have ever been, I think one of the key issues on the agenda of all political parties should be how are we actually going to reduce the burden of government on the British people?
It's been an interesting conversation. Well, Shreya and Elliot, thank you very much for talking through what is no doubt going to be a conversation in this general election campaign that does run on and on.